name is Abby Pepper, and I am the campus pastor of Raytown Chapel Church. It is so good to be joining you for this midweek devotion. We are in a sermon series right now called All Roads Lead to Rome. We're reading right along with the sermon series, the letter to the Romans. By the end of the series, will have read all of Romans. So each week, your little homework is to read 4 chapters. So this week, we are in chapters 1 through 4. And then on Sunday, we'll be exploring through the sermon another area of Romans. So our devotion for the week doesn't necessarily go along with the sermon, but by the end, hopefully, we have all kind of been in a deep dive into what Paul writes in this letter, that we can have an overarching understanding of what he gets to in this letter to the Romans. So this week, I have chosen chapter 1, verse 16 through 17 for our devotion. So hear these words. For I am not ashamed of the gospel, because it is the power of God that brings salvation to everyone who believes, first to the Jew, then to the Gentile. For in the gospel, the righteousness of God is revealed, a righteousness that is by faith, from first to last, just as it is written, the righteous will live by faith. So like I've already kind of said, this letter is to a community of believers in Rome. And these 2 verses are often referred to as Paul's thesis statement of this letter, that this letter is so dense and complex because it is an overarching view of his theology, of his understanding of God's work in and through the people at that time and place, and for us today. So he is writing to Christians in Rome who are facing this problem, and they were wrestling with these coexisting groups with different interpretations of how it was that they were to live as Christ followers. This sounds nothing like what we have to deal with today, right? That's some sarcasm. We today still face this problem of trying to figure out what it means to be Christ followers in the 21st century. We have different people who think one way and another group who thinks this way. So it's nothing new, and it is in our history to debate and to think differently. But Paul is writing about where we can find unity in that. So it's during the late 40s CE that a large number of Jewish people who were living in Rome were forced to leave. The emperor at the time had ordered them to leave, and it wasn't until the new emperor came on that they were then allowed back into the city. It was at this point that during the years when that population of Jewish people were gone, that the remaining group of people, the remaining Christian community, experienced a rise in Gentiles who were coming to faith, those who were not raised up in the Jewish faith. That is what a Gentile is. Now, with the Jewish population returning, the question for this community was whether they should continue to win the Jewish people over for Christ or concentrate on this body of Gentile believers. You see, the Jews were told to follow a law and had practices that aimed them in a way that they could acknowledge God in their life, and they practiced this law, and they had it in their heritage to practice it. But the Gentiles came to faith not following that law, came to faith understanding that they didn't have to practice those things. So Paul begins to make his position clear by stating God's power for salvation is to the Jew first and to the Greek. You hear Paul says all means all. So the Christians in Rome here were obligated to spread the gospel to everybody. It didn't matter if you were a Jew or a Greek. It meant everybody was included in this. They both had to follow after Jesus' humiliation of dying to self and dying to their ways. It was in this dying to self that they would live a life of abundance, a flourishing life. And it is here in the power of the gospel that Paul says that Jesus brings us into right relationship, or in other words, justifies us, and unites us through his death, life, and resurrection. It's in this idea that we all need that power. And Paul says he is not ashamed that we need that power, because we have all fallen short. We have all missed the mark. Ways of saying that we have all sinned. And so it is in this that God, through Jesus Christ, justifies human beings through faith, bringing freedom from sin, law, and death. He also acknowledges this idea of faith, that faith begins and ends everything. It's this idea that God's faithfulness asks in response our human trust and faith. God is faithful even when we are not. When we are faithless, God is faithful. Additionally, he talks about how faithfulness goes beyond just our act of one time saying yes to God. Faithfulness is more about orienting our entire being around who God says we should be. He also acknowledges this idea of righteousness, the righteousness of God, and how we, the righteous, the good, are to live. This righteousness of God is acknowledging that God is just, and all of God's activity is about bringing humans into right relationship. And this act is an act of justice. So when we as humans bring each other back into right relationship with one another, we are participating in justice. In our contemporary understanding, we often think of our personal salvation, our individual relationship with God. But here, Paul, throughout the letter, will be talking about a collective understanding of salvation. That it is our collective relationship with God that matters. It's not that we as individuals and our own relationship with God doesn't matter. That's not true. It's that God wants us all to be in right relationship with not only God, but one another. So the good news goes beyond the status of one individual or one people group, but it includes everybody. And it's only God's power that does this and accomplishes it. And we should not be ashamed of that. You know, here at Raytown Chapel Church, we talk about connecting people to Jesus Christ. We want to connect every single individual to Jesus Christ. But we talk about that in terms of community. We talk about it in terms of a transforming community, where we are brought together to be transformed individually, but also collectively. So when we gather online or in person on a Sunday or whatever day that we worship, we are acting as this transforming community together as we individually, but also collectively, are transformed by the power of Jesus Christ. So yes, this is a very complex letter that we are diving into, and that's just 2 verses that we covered today. But I encourage you to read right along with us these verses and these chapters so that we might be together transformed and that we can be unashamed of the power of the gospel, of that good news that we can be made right with God, but also all of us can be made right in a collective sense. So I hope you have a great rest of your week, and I look forward to hearing what you are learning right along with me.